former Congressman Ron Paul to look at North Korea and the biggest military drills in history ahead of a possible strike. I hope that's not the case. I hope everything can be peaches and cream. That's what Ron Paul wants. Get back to our republic, be peaceful, trade with people, work with people, and turn this world around. Go away from authoritarianism and collectivism to individualism. So the omnibudsman of the global movement to awaken humanity is Ron Paul. And he doesn't like to be complimented, but it's important to see where we've come. Running for president twice just in the last decade or so, very successfully waking people up, challenging the cultural Marxism on the colleges, building the modern Tea Party movement that the Republicans thought they hijacked, but really they brought in our Trojan horse. We've now gotten Trump elected. Doesn't mean he's perfect, but he's trying to be the American president, getting us out of the TPP, doing other things. I want to get, as a historian, Dr. Ron Paul's take on where we are and where he thinks we're going, what he thinks is going to happen with the Russia investigation and the fact that the Democrats are in bed with the Russians saying Trump is. But I also want to first get into critical things he wants to say about Trump, which I know is the whole North Korea situation. A lot of people have noticed that, we publish Ron Paul's articles on InfoWars.com and put links to his different TV radio shows and Ron Paul Institute. And then we also have some articles that are more hawkish about North Korea. We're just showing both perspectives. Undoubtedly, the sanctions make it worse for the North Korean people. But at the same time, we are dealing with a Marxist-Leninist hermit empire regime. So I want to get his take on what he thinks we should do to try to de-escalate the North Korea situation, and then get his take on where we are politically in America if they try to indict Trump, if they try to impeach him. I think it could cause serious civil unrest and really a culture war that's already been cold could get hot. And we got about a 2-second delay from some reason always with our system and his, but that's okay. But that's why you'll hear a pause. So Dr. Paul, thank you so much for joining us from the Liberty Report studios.
Thank you, Alex. Nice to be with you.
Well, please just go ahead and jump right into, you heard me throw out that cornucopia in the last 2 minutes. What do you want to tackle first?
Well, there's so many. I think the country is in a big mess. And though I'm optimistic on the long run, because I think the philosophy of liberty and libertarianism is on the move and making great strides, but more intellectually than politically. The politics of this country is a mess, and it's epitomized by what's going on between Republicans and Democrats. And quite frankly, I don't see a whole lot of difference between the two. They fight and argue who has the power and who can control things. But they're really in bed together when it comes to big government spending and the Federal Reserve and the foreign policy of policing the world. So they're all the same. But I think the big thing that we have to face up to, and why they can't get tax bills passed very easily, and if they do, they don't do much, and the spending bills, is because we're flat out broke and we have too much debt, and they don't deal with it. The seriousness of our problems, I don't think there's a way out, but we have to change the philosophy of the country. And that's what my goal is, to change people's attitudes. Right now, there's a large number of people who would like to see the changes and a lot of frustration out there, but there's still a lot of people totally dependent on the welfare system and on the warfare and this policing of the world and the military-industrial complex. And they are very powerful. They are the deep state, and they have a lot to say about what's going on. So even though we hear this noise in Washington, unfortunately, the deep state is our biggest enemy.
Let's get into Trump. He's working really well with Senator Paul, your son, right now. He's trying to get the tax cuts. He's trying to stabilize the country. I understand it's a bubble, but it's an American bubble to get us out of the globalist bubble. They want it to implode so they can derail our nationalistic moves. I know Trump's not perfect, but compared to Hillary Clinton, he's trying to return sovereignty. The globalists hate his guts. All over the world, there are movements for countries to self-determine. Whether I totally agree with leaders in Italy or leaders in Austria or leaders in the UK like Nigel Farage, at least they're trying to bring home rule back to the nation state, and that's why existentially I'm supporting Trump so hard. I mean, what's it like for you to be exposing world government for 40 years, sir, and now to see it being admitted and the Federal Reserve being a problem being admitted? There's got to be some satisfaction there, but separately, can you speak then just the overall battle we're seeing between nationalism and globalism?
Well, I'd feel better if our policies really did change. I mean, the appointments to the Federal Reserve, that won't help us. I don't think that the foreign policy has changed. We're still sending more troops overseas, and right now, you know, they're talking about major changes in the Middle East, which is going to antagonize the conflict between the Sunnis and the Shia. So they. You know, Saudi Arabia and that war going on in Yemen and our support for that, we're guilty, morally speaking, of providing the weapons to Saudi Arabia for what's happening there. And it's a fight between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And we don't need that. It's been going on for too long. We need to stay out of that. We can't afford it. And besides, I think if you want to compare things, Saudi Arabia is a mess. And why we get on the moral high ground of supporting them and then think that we have to go to war against Iran, that's a serious thing. So I haven't seen a reversal in our involvement overseas, and a lot of noise is going on why we have to be prepared. Next week we may invade North Korea. I think that's very dangerous.
Well, yeah, North Korea, certainly. That could trigger a larger nuclear war with China and Russia. And I'm not pushing for a war. I mean, you've broken down ways to de-escalate North Korea. But at the same time, North Korea and their communist regime, they certainly bear some of the responsibility as well, don't they?
Of course they do, but they're nothing. They're zero. You know, that whole thing about the missile they shot the other day, and the news media carried it like crazy. Now they can reach the United States with a nuclear weapon. Well, that was a fizzle. It went up there. It didn't re-enter. They don't have an ability for those weapons to re-enter the atmosphere, and it blew up there. But you never heard anything about that. So I think it's way blown out of proportion to what North Korea can do. South Korea is a lot less concerned and worried about the North Koreans than we are. And I think we ought to encourage the South Koreans to talk to the North Koreans. The North Koreans can't even light up their houses and their system. Their cities are totally black at night. They're a third world nation.
Yes.
And all they do is destroy their people in the middle class by spending more money on weapons. And there's going to be a limit. Eventually, China will quit, subsidizing and taking care of them. But I don't see, as I've said so many times, this whole thing started when I was in high school, under Truman. Going in, who started it? The UN. We listened to the UN, and now we still go to them for resolutions and all. If we were working in our own self-interest, I'll tell you what we would do. We'd have an explanation to South Korea and say, you go talk to them. They're your neighbors. Let Japan help you if necessary, but we're coming home. Now, that would be an American first policy.
Well, I know Jimmy Carter tried to do a peace deal, but then the Clintons transferred weapon systems, the ability for them to create the uranium. So, I mean, I would all be about trying to help the North Korean people, but I wonder why the globalist interests in the last 25 years have helped arm North Korea. I mean, the word is they want to use it as a strategic tension in the peninsula and an excuse for U.S. forces to stay in the area.
Yeah, and, when that the deal with Carter and Clinton, there's a difference between intervention and then helping them. I've argued that we offer only two types of intervention. We'll intervene and they do what we tell them, which some of them don't like it, and North Koreans don't like it. Or if not, we're going to threaten you with violence or we're going to drop bombs on you. Why don't we just say non-interventionism, neither give them help nor bomb them? And this whole thing, these sanctions, they don't work. Look at the foolishness on how we dealt with Cuba. And now we're still, I mean, right now this administration wants to undo a little more open policy with the Cuban people. And they're no more close to the Marxist philosophy now. They're much further away than they used to be.
Former Congressman Ron Paul, we've got to go to break. We're going to come right back, and I'll ask you more about that. Would you be an envoy if Trump wanted you to go to North Korea? And coming to us live from Houston, in the studios of Phonoscope, former Congressman, medical doctor, great patriot, Ron Paul. You've got the Ron Paul Institute, great place to visit as well, does the Liberty Report, and so much more. Well, in the 9 minutes we have left, I want to cut right to the chase. Finishing up on North Korea. If Donald Trump wanted to send you as an envoy, a peace envoy, instead of Jimmy Carter, to North Korea, would you go? A, B, any other points on that escalation? You've been writing a lot about how you think we should de-escalate this. And then separately, I want to then get into the Russian witch hunt, the Clintons in bed with the Russians, Mueller investigating back 20 years now on Trump, just the establishment so desperate right now to try to defeat this political realignment towards populism. Can you first speak to North Korea and then what you think about the whole Russia gate? I mean, I've seen John McCain on the Senate floor say that Senator Rand Paul is a Russian agent, that Tucker Carlson's a Russian agent, that I'm a Russian agent. They're having hearings, sir, saying I need to be censored because I'm a Russian with zero proof, no due process, and then Google, Facebook, and Twitter are beginning to censor, sir. So again, North Korea and then just the whole Russiagate situation, Ron Paul.
Well, as far as going to North Korea, and if he asked me to do that, first thing is the odds of that happening are pretty slim. The second reaction would be if there's an honest attempt to try to have better relations and work out some problems with North Korea, yeah, I'd be delighted to participate. But the big problem would be that my ideas about North Korea contradict how we're treating North Korea now. Actually, I think the treatment with North Korea has gotten much worse. It's been bad all along. I mean, we've always had this conflict, and nothing ever gets
Sure,
improved.
but you could be the carrot.
But what I would prefer is if he were serious about me going to do that, let me write a one-page memo and tell him what I think needs to be done. And it wouldn't involve the United States as much as the people around them, South Korea getting involved, Japan being involved, Russia being involved, China involved. Maybe they ought to get together and talk about this and get over it, and that we're backing off because that's in much greater interest than in ours. And see if there could be an agreement on that memo. So that, to me, would have some value. But for me just to go over there, it would be such a conflict of the policies we have now versus my non-interventionist approach to foreign policy.
Well, but stranger things have happened, and I think you'd be better than Jimmy Carter. He's offered. You could bring it from a libertarian perspective, the carrot. So I'm just throwing it out there, and I know that Senator Paul and, of course, the president talk all the time. We could send Senator Rand Paul. I think he'd be a great envoy.
I wouldn't argue with that.
Again, we got about a 2-second delay here with Ron Paul. It's great to visit his main site, ronpaulinstitute.org. In the 5 minutes we have left, sir, let's get into Russiagate. Let's get into that situation because, I mean, I've been looking at it, and there's just nothing there, and now they've indicted Flynn off some FBI agent's notes who it turns out worked for Hillary and exonerated that, and it just gets crazier and crazier to see an unelected group running mad dog, trying to overthrow an elected president. I don't think the nation could survive it if they actually try to indict him and impeach him. Trump's just too popular with the base. What is your overall take on Russiagate and all the rest of this?
I agree with your frustration because it doesn't make any sense. But I'm frustrated because our Justice Department doesn't do anything. The Republicans are in charge. They have the office. And what happened to this investigation of Hillary? You hear bits and pieces of it, but all you hear is about the investigation of Trump. He's supposed to be the president, and how did we ever allow a guy like Mueller and get in charge of this? I think the Justice Department is not doing the job. And it's just totally out of control. So I don't know who really is in charge. But right now, I don't think this administration has prevented this from happening because it can't be. I think it's all built up. It's all fiction on what they're accusing. And I've been on receiving this end too because I've been on RT, and they think that this is just horrible. But quite frankly. RT has treated libertarians a little bit more respectful than our own television companies because, you know, they don't want to hear libertarianism and non-interventionism.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you were an omelet in North Korea, it doesn't mean you're a North Korean. If you go on Japanese TV, you're not in league with the Japanese. If you go on British television, now you've been on British, I've been on British hundreds of times. Doesn't mean I work for the Brits. It's the same craziness. And again, back to the censorship. I mean, they admit massive censorship now. The telecoms are engaged in it. The big internet companies are doing it, mainly on libertarians and conservatives and yours truly. And they're using the Russia excuse with no evidence saying, well, we can censor InfoWars because they work with the Russians. And, of course, they've talked about you. They've said, oh, look at the Russian stooge, Ron Paul and Rand Paul and Tucker Carlson. I mean, this is a real witch hunt.
There's a story